The usual story, if you go looking for documents, is that there was a fire. To even obtain my father's U.S. Army records, 1941, 1943, yes. 1935, 41, 1943, 1996, no, did not exist. Even my father did not exist. One briefcase, a job that isn't real. One briefcase, U.S. Army. But if I asked the Army, or if you asked the Army, U.S. Army, my father did not exist. 1941 to 43, Soldaten, soldier. He was a soldier. So when I found pictures later in 43 and 44 and 45 and 36 and 37 and 38, he was not in uniform, not in an Army uniform. Prior to World War II, President Roosevelt told the people in his fireside chats, we will never go to war. Your sons will never fight in another European war. But yet, he and Winston Churchill were planning World War II. 1936 to 1938, the Civil War in Spain was practice for the Germans, for the Russians, for the Americans, for the British, for the French. The Wehrmacht was there, Stukas, German 88s, Luftwaffe, the so-called Condor Legion. My father's baseball team, which was sponsored by the U.S. Army, the men were recruited. They were not soldiers, but they were sent to Camp Meade, which became Fort Meade, which became INSCOM, which was USA, U.S. Army. U.S. is United States, USA is U.S. Army. Intelligence and Security Command, INSCOM. Prior to the war, there was COI, Coordinator of Intelligence, and then there was OSS, Office of Strategic Services. But within the Army, there was CIC, Counterintelligence Corps. There was G2, which was Military Intelligence. And both the Russian Army, the Wehrmacht, and Her Majesty's Army had the same functions, but they were called different things. For the Russians, it was NKVD, which became KGB. For the Americans, it was COI, OSS, which became CIA, DIA, NIA. The acronyms always had a meaning, but a different meaning than simply three letters. It was much deeper than that. You had to consider that for the U.S. Army, there was no Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht like in Germany. There was a U.S. Army and a U.S. Army Air Corps. And the Air Corps was the Army. The Army was the Air Corps. In 1948, that changed. There became a U.S. Air Force, USAF. Each service, Army, Navy, which had Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Air Force, had an intelligence and a counterintelligence service. But the records could be with one man for his use and had another location for storage. But that storage was moved depending on the level of secrecy. And counterintelligence was top secret. It was kept from our own president unless he needed to use it, because there were spies everywhere. Particularly, our allies were Russia, which became our enemy in the Cold War. So during World War II, and during the Spanish Civil War, my father fought with Russians, but not in an army uniform. He was in a hunter's outfit. He wore a beret at times, but one eye was watching the Russians, who would become the communists. So he became an expert in who was NKVD, who they were, how they worked, when they worked, what they did, so that during the Cold War, when the KGB evolved from the NKVD, Father's specialty became hiding good Germans from Russian intelligence. Likewise, the Russian side had NKVD and SMERSH, Schmert, meaning death, Spionem, spy, death to spies and counter-revolutionaries and anyone else that Stalin decreed as an enemy. Likewise, Hitler had Sicherheitsdienst, Geheimstaatspolizei, the Wehrmacht, the Abwehr, Admiral Canaris in the Navy. Each of them had an intelligence and a counterintelligence function. When it came to war production in the United States, we called it the Manhattan Project, which was to hide our nuclear research. Manhattan, New York City, the real project, Savannah River, Los Alamos, and Richland, Kennewick, Pasco, along the Columbia River in the state of Washington. Plutonium, enrichment of uranium, and then testing with facilities. There was another test facility hidden under a football stadium at the University of Chicago. The German situation was much more complex. It spanned the Third Reich. It included Eastern Germany, mountains of Bavaria, Austria, the Czech Republic, Poland, wherever there were uranium mines. In France, uranium had to be imported from the Belgian Congo, and there was a depot in Strasbourg. In Germany, there was a complex of multiple sites. Uranium was freely available. It was also available in something called coal ash. As coal was burned, there was something called fly ash. And those residues included purified uranium. It was in very small amounts, perhaps not enough for hundreds of tons to make a nuclear weapon, but it was still a source of purified uranium. Raw or yellowcake uranium could be brought out of the earth in Thuringen and Erdorf in Poland and Czechoslovakia. And as that material, that raw material, had to be purified either through a process with heavy water, a process requiring high amounts of electricity, an electrochemical process, a process using regular water, a process using gas diffusion, a process using centrifuges, which is familiar to us now as we contemplate the potential bomb in Tehran.